The first time I saw the ocean swallow the lights of the rig, I thought it was just a power surge. But then the horizon went black, the waves froze, and the air around me carried whispers that weren't carried by the wind. That was when the foreman handed me a list of 11 rules scratched into a sheet of rusted metal. Rules that every night watchman was forced to memorize or die trying. I remember the first time I broke one of them. The darkness moved closer, almost tasting me before the lights flickered back on. Now I can't stop wondering what happens if all the lights fail at once. The foreman didn't give me much of a welcome when I first arrived on the rig. His hands were black with grease, his jaw covered in stubble, and his eyes looked older than the rest of him. He pressed a folded, oil-stained card into my palm and muttered, "Rule 1. Never let the floodlights go dark." I remember thinking it was an odd thing to start with, especially when there were so many safety regulations already taped to the walls. But the way he spoke carried something heavier than policy. It was less of an instruction and more of a plea. The first night was supposed to be simple. Walk the perimeter, check the locks, make sure no one was where they shouldn't be, and above all else, keep an eye on the lights. I told myself it was just common sense. Out here hundreds of miles from the nearest shore, light meant life. Without it, you couldn't see the ladders, couldn't see the catwalks, couldn't see the waves that could throw you into the sea if you slipped. Still, there was something about the phrasing that made me uneasy. It wasn't keep the lights on for safety. It was never let them go dark, as though the moment they did, something would take advantage of it. From the top deck, the ocean stretched in every direction, endless and black. The lights of the rig didn't illuminate the sea so much as they pushed against it, barely holding back a wall of darkness that looked thicker than night should ever be. Standing there, with the hum of the flood lamps above me, I started to imagine the dark as a living thing, something pressing its weight against the circle of brightness, waiting for the smallest crack to seep through. That was when I realized why the card had felt heavier than paper. It wasn't a guideline, it was a barrier. Hours passed slowly. The night watch has a rhythm, or so the veterans say, but for me it was just isolation wrapped in steel and salt air. Every sound was amplified, the groan of the pipes, the sigh of the wind, the distant crash of waves against the pillars. Each time I circled back to the south end of the rig, I glanced at the nearest floodlight, half expecting to find it dimming. When I looked too long, the halo around the beam shimmered strangely, like something was moving just beyond it, pacing along the edge where light met black water. Around midnight, fog rolled in from the west. It wasn't the soft, wispy kind you see on a calm morning. This fog clung to the rig like wet cloth, so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The beams of the floodlights strained through it, carving pale tunnels in the air that seemed fragile, as though a breath might shatter them. I paused at the railing, listening. Fog muffles sound, but that night it did the opposite. Every lap of water, every groan of metal, every vibration from the generator below echoed sharp in my ears. It felt like the fog was amplifying the world just to remind me how alone I was. I thought about calling the control room, asking if anyone else noticed how strange the fog was, but the radio felt heavy in my hand. It seemed foolish to wake the others just because I was unsettled. That was when the first flicker happened. A floodlight over the helipad blinked, a short, stuttering pulse that left the platform in shadow for a fraction of a second. I froze, my stomach turning cold, waiting for it to go out completely. Then it steadied again, buzzing faintly. I forced a laugh, telling myself it was just the wiring, but the sound died in my throat when I saw movement at the edge of its reach. It wasn't clear movement, not like a person or a bird, more like the fog itself was folding in, curling as though something was brushing through it. I leaned forward, squinting, but the harder I stared, the less sure I became. My mind supplied shapes. A hunched figure, an arm too long, a face without features. But each time I blinked, it dissolved back into the mist. I backed away, suddenly aware of how far I was from the door, how exposed the deck was, how the railing behind me offered nothing but a drop into freezing water. The flicker came again, and this time the darkness seemed to swell forward, rushing closer during that heartbeat of shadow. I could swear the fog thickened in the gap, like something took a step toward me before retreating when the light buzzed back on. My throat went dry. I fumbled for the generator control, thinking maybe I could boost the output, but before I reached it, the foreman's voice crackled through the radio. "Keep your eyes open," he said, his tone low and deliberate. "Don't let the lights die, no matter what." He didn't explain how he knew, or why he sounded like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. I asked him if he'd seen something, if there was anyone out there in the fog, but all he replied was, "Stay in the light." The radio cut off with a hiss, leaving me shaking with a fear I hadn't felt since childhood. I knew better than to ask again. The silence after his warning felt too heavy, too deliberate, as though repeating the question might invite something to answer that wasn't him. I gripped the railing, eyes fixed on the helipad light, daring it to flicker again. The next 30 minutes felt longer than the whole shift combined. The fog thickened, the sea slapped harder against the pillars, and the floodlight hummed louder, like it was straining against whatever pressed against it. I tried to distract myself, pacing the perimeter, but every few steps I'd glance back, half expecting the entire row of lights to blink out at once. They never did, not completely, but each flicker left me closer to the edge of panic. When the shift finally ended, and the sun broke the horizon, the fog melted away like it had never existed. The sea glittered, calm and endless, and the rig seemed ordinary again, just a skeleton of steel in the water. But I couldn't forget what I'd seen, the way the dark surged forward during each flicker, the suggestion of something waiting just beyond the light. The foreman met me at the mess hall, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't ask if I'd followed the first rule. He didn't need to. He just clapped me on the shoulder and muttered, "You lasted the night. Not everyone does." Even now, writing this, I can't shake the memory of that flicker. 1 second of shadow felt like an invitation, and whatever was out there had been ready to accept. I'm not sure how many nights I can endure, watching those lights strain against the black, but I do know this: the first rule isn't a suggestion, and it isn't superstition, it's survival. And the next time a light falters, I'm not sure I'll be fast enough to stop the darkness from stepping inside the circle. When the sun dipped the next evening, the rig's steel groaned with the returning cold, and the men shuffled inside for their meals. I lingered on deck, half dreading the night shift that loomed ahead. Before leaving, the foreman handed me that same stained card again, his finger tapping the second line. Rule 2. Do not answer voices coming from the water. He didn't wait for me to nod or agree. He just turned away, leaving me to wonder why a warning like that was even necessary. Out here, the sea was supposed to be empty. By the time the last streaks of daylight bled away, the floodlights were back to their uneasy glow, fencing me in against the infinite dark. The fog had not returned, but the ocean itself seemed alive in a way it hadn't been the night before. Waves slapped harder against the legs of the rig, carrying an odd rhythm that didn't sound like wind or tide. I tried telling myself it was just the storm season setting in, but the way the water moved, too precise, almost patterned, sent a shiver crawling up my spine. I kept walking, boots echoing on steel, trying to ignore the prickle of awareness that something was listening beneath me. Hours passed. The sea refused to settle, and every lap against the pillars below seemed closer, as though the ocean was climbing the rig one surge at a time. My radio hissed occasionally with static, each burst sharp enough to make me flinch, but no voice came through. When I leaned against the railing to smoke, I caught myself staring too long into the black beneath, waiting for the waves to break into something else, something shaped like hands, like faces, like forms I couldn't quite name. The longer I stared, the more my imagination painted horrors beneath the surface, until I finally tore my gaze away and cursed myself for being paranoid. It was near midnight when I heard it, a voice faint at first, curling up from the water like the echo of a memory. I froze, cigarette forgotten between my fingers, listening. It was a woman's tone, soft and broken, carrying words I couldn't fully catch. My first thought was madness. Maybe one of the crew had fallen. Maybe someone had been left behind. But then she spoke again, clearer this time, and I realized she was calling my name. My full name, as if she knew me. My pulse hammered, my throat closing around a shout that nearly tore free before the words of the second rule clawed through my memory. Do not answer. I backed away from the railing, every muscle in my body tense, the cigarette burning down between my fingers unnoticed. The voice rose, louder now, desperation sharpening her tone. She begged, pleaded, swore she was drowning, that if I didn't help, she'd be lost forever. I covered my ears, but the sound wasn't dulled. It seemed to vibrate through the metal itself, rising through the rig's bones, until it lived inside my skull. I wanted to call the foreman, to demand an explanation, but my hands shook too hard to hold the radio steady. The only thing that kept me silent was the memory of his bloodshot stare that morning, the weight of his hand on my shoulder when he said not everyone survives their first night. I forced myself to keep moving, circling the deck as though my routine could anchor me against the storm building in my head. But the voice followed. No matter where I went, she trailed behind, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always curling up from the Black Sea below. At one point, I thought I heard a second voice, deeper, distorted, weaving beneath hers in a tone that wasn't human. They overlapped, like two actors reading the same script in different languages, yet somehow both knew exactly how to pull at the softest corners of my memory. When I passed the helipad, the sound shifted. The woman's pleas turned into laughter, brittle and sharp, echoing from beneath the platform. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking as I scanned the water, but the beam only bounced across restless waves. Then came the scraping, a sound like fingernails dragging across steel, rising from the support beams below. I knew no human hand could reach that far up from the waterline, yet the screech carried on, high and steady, until it rattled through my teeth. I wanted to scream, to curse, to shout anything just to release the tension, but the second rule tightened around my throat like a rope. The hours stretched, and I realized the voices weren't fading, they were learning. The woman stopped begging, and started mimicking. First it was my name again, then my voice, repeating fragments of words I'd muttered to myself earlier in the shift. I heard myself laugh from the ocean, low and broken. I heard my mother's tone, calling me like she used to when dinner was ready. I heard a child's cry, high-pitched and frantic, echoing through the windless night. Each time, my body reacted before my brain could, muscles twitching, heart lurching, throat tightening around the instinct to respond. Each time, I bit down hard on my tongue, until I tasted blood. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, silence finally fell. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the noise. It was heavy, crushing, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl because you know it's staged. I gripped the railing and stared at the horizon, praying for the faintest gray of dawn. And then from directly below me, a voice whispered with perfect clarity, "All you have to do is say something back." I stumbled away, my boot catching on a coil of cable, nearly sending me sprawling. My chest heaved, my throat raw, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words were a trap, and I knew if I gave them air, I'd be dragged into something far worse than the sea. My hands shook until the sun finally cut through the sky, burning the water into gold. With daylight, the voices vanished, leaving only the ordinary slap of waves against the rig. When I staggered into the mess hall that morning, the foreman was waiting. He didn't ask if I'd heard them. He didn't need to. The look on my face was answer enough. Instead, he slid a mug of coffee toward me and muttered, "Most men don't make it through their first conversation with the water." His voice was calm, but his hands trembled as he gripped his cup. I realized then that the rules weren't just warnings. They were scars, written by those who had already failed to follow them. And I knew, deep in my gut, that if I had spoken back even once, I wouldn't be here writing this now. I'd be somewhere beneath the waves, my own voice joining the chorus, calling for the next fool to answer. The third night began with a strange heaviness in the air, as though the sea itself knew what was coming. I had barely finished my coffee when the foreman stopped me at the door, his voice low, his face paler than usual. He tapped the third line on that card, his finger pressing so hard it left a smudge. Rule 3, never walk the deck when the siren sounds. His jaw tightened when I asked why, and he muttered only, "You'll hear it, and when you do, don't move a damn inch." That night the sky was clear, the moon cutting silver streaks across the water, and for the first time the horizon didn't look endless. It looked like a mouth stretched wide. The rig's lights hummed steady, strong against the black, and for a while I let myself believe the shift might pass quietly. But there was something different in the air, a vibration I could feel through the steel under my boots, like the entire platform was bracing itself. Even the waves seemed hesitant, as though waiting for a signal to strike. I tried to ignore it, pacing the perimeter, eyes darting toward the helipad floodlight that had betrayed me before. The fog hadn't returned, and the water below was strangely calm, almost too calm, like glass laid across something moving beneath it. I found myself whispering under my breath, repeating the first 2 rules like prayers. Never let the floodlights go dark. Do not answer voices coming from the water, because repeating them made me feel less exposed. I thought about the third, and every step felt heavier, wondering what kind of siren I was supposed to fear. It came just after midnight, a low, quivering sound that rose out of the sea itself, vibrating through the rig, through my bones, through the air in my lungs. At first it sounded like the deep groan of metal, like one of the massive legs straining against the waves. But then it shifted, climbing into something that wasn't mechanical at all. It was almost musical, almost beautiful, a long cry that seemed to call to every fragile part of me that wanted comfort in the dark. My hands froze on the railing, and every instinct screamed at me to step back. I remembered the rule, don't walk the deck, don't move, so I stayed rooted, my boots welded to the steel, even as the sound grew louder. It wasn't just noise, it was inside me, vibrating in my chest, tugging at my muscles. My knees wanted to bend, my arms wanted to reach, and I had to bite down hard on my tongue to stop myself from leaning toward it. Somewhere in the ringing note, I swore I heard voices layered beneath the sound. Not words, not exactly, but shapes of language pressed into the music, promising warmth, safety, home. The siren built, swelling into something massive, and with it came a pressure in the air that pushed against my skull. I wanted to scream, to run, to slam myself against the door and hide inside, but the memory of the foreman's words kept me frozen. If I moved, if I even shifted my weight, I knew something would notice. My eyes darted to the floodlights, praying they wouldn't flicker, but they glared steady, casting the deck in stark white. And then I saw it, shapes rising at the edge of the glow, half-formed, dragging themselves through the shimmer where light touched water. They weren't people, not fully. They had arms, too many of them, bending at wrong angles. Their faces shimmered like reflections in broken glass, constantly shifting, never settling. Their bodies seemed to carry the water with them, dripping endlessly, though no puddles formed beneath their feet. They moved closer with every swell of the siren, swaying drawn upward like puppets dancing to the sound. My lungs locked, and sweat slid down my back as I forced myself still, nails digging into the railing, until they nearly tore. One of them paused at the edge of the light, head tilting in a jerking motion, as though it sensed me. Its face shifted through a dozen forms, before stopping on one that made my blood run cold. My own. It was me, staring back at me, mouth open wide, the sound of the siren pouring out. My vision blurred, and for a heartbeat I nearly stepped forward, nearly answered the call with my own voice. Then the floodlight above flickered, just once, and the thing jerked away, vanishing into the black, as if the light had burned it. The siren dragged on for what felt like an eternity, the sound twisting higher and higher until I thought my ears would bleed. I stayed frozen, every muscle aching, until finally, just before dawn, it broke. Silence returned so suddenly it felt violent, the absence of sound heavier than the noise had been. My knees buckled, and I collapsed against the deck, shaking, breath coming in ragged gasps. The shapes were gone, the water calm again, but I knew they hadn't left. They were waiting, just beyond the edge of the light, listening for the next time the siren called. When I stumbled inside at sunrise, the foreman was already waiting. He didn't ask if I'd heard it. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale, and when he spoke, his voice cracked like it hadn't been used in days. "You froze?" he asked. I nodded, too weak to speak, and his shoulders sagged with relief. Then he leaned closer, whispering, "Good. The ones who walk never make it back inside." He didn't explain further, and I didn't ask. Some truths, I realized, were worse than ignorance. But as I tried to sleep later, the memory of that shape haunted me. The reflection wearing my face, mouth wide, siren pouring from its throat. It wasn't gone. It was waiting, maybe even practicing. And the thought that chilled me most was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. If it could wear my face once, what would stop it from wearing it again, better this time? The fourth night brought no fog, no voices, and no siren. But that didn't calm me. Sometimes quiet is worse, because it makes you think the sea is letting you breathe, only to see what you'll do with it. When the foreman handed me the card again before my shift, his finger tapped the next line with more force than I'd seen yet. Rule 4. Never look directly at the horizon after midnight. He didn't explain why, just muttered, "Eyes down, eyes near. Don't let it see you back." By the time I stepped onto the deck, the ocean was calm, too calm, the kind of glassy surface that reflects the world like a mirror. The floodlights painted bright circles across the rig, but beyond them stretched only perfect black, smooth as oil. I walked slower than usual, my chest tight, the weight of the new rule pressing against me. Every instinct I had wanted to check the horizon, to measure how empty it really was. But the more I resisted, the more I felt it out there, stretching and breathing, waiting for me to look. The hours dragged in tense silence. My boots clanged against steel, my flashlight cut through corners, but my eyes stayed low, trained on the deck, the lights, the edges of my shadow. Still, curiosity itched like an insect under my skin. If the horizon was empty, why forbid me from looking at it? If it wasn't, then what could possibly be out there, that noticing it might give it strength? I gripped the railing at one point, tempted to steal a glance, but my knuckles whitened with restraint. The rule wasn't a suggestion, and I'd seen enough to know better by now. But rules have a way of testing you. Just past 1 in the morning, I caught movement at the corner of my vision, a shimmer like heat above asphalt, rippling at the edge of the world. I told myself it was just exhaustion, my eyes betraying me, but the shimmer grew, spreading across the horizon line like a crack in glass. I clenched my jaw, forcing my gaze down, though every nerve screamed to look up, to confirm what I was half seeing. My breath came shallow, and sweat slicked my back beneath the coveralls. The shimmer pulsed, and though I never lifted my head, I felt something shift in the air. The steel beneath me vibrated faintly, and the floodlights dimmed as though the rig itself were bowing under a weight too heavy to bear. I gripped the railing harder, heart hammering, refusing to lift my gaze. That was when I heard it, not voices, not sirens, but a sound like distant thunder rolling across the water, steady and deliberate. The horizon wasn't empty. It was walking closer. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a coil of cable, my hands shaking so violently, I almost dropped the flashlight. The sound carried on, not fading, not growing louder, but constant, as though each step out there matched the rhythm of my pulse. My stomach twisted, bile rising, and I pressed a hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. I knew if I looked, even once, I'd see something that would never leave me, something that wanted me to see it. Minutes stretched like hours. My body ached from staying hunched. My eyes locked stubbornly on the deck. Still, the temptation clawed at me. The shimmer danced at the edge of my vision, and with each pulse of thunder, it seemed to press harder, demanding recognition. I whispered to myself, repeating the rules in order, like anchors keeping me tied to the rig. Don't let the floodlights go dark. Don't answer the voices. Don't walk during the siren. Don't look at the horizon. My own voice became a lifeline, a rhythm stronger than the pull above me. Then came the mistake. A gust of wind tore across the deck, sharp and sudden, and it tipped my flashlight out of my hand. It clattered against the railing, spinning, and for a fraction of a second, my eyes lifted to follow its fall. That single heartbeat nearly destroyed me. At the edge of the floodlight's reach, against the black horizon, I saw it. A shape too large to measure, taller than the rig itself, rising out of the sea like the skeleton of a mountain. Its eyes glowed faintly, pale and endless, locked on me with an intimacy that froze the breath in my lungs. I dropped flat onto the deck, shoving my face against cold steel, shaking uncontrollably. The thunder grew sharper, louder, the rhythm of it now matching my ragged breaths. I thought it would climb onto the rig, crush the platform with a single hand, but instead it paused, waiting, watching. My skin crawled, every inch of me screaming that I had been seen, marked, remembered. The floodlights above hummed louder, buzzing, and for a moment I thought they would fail entirely. Then the sound of thunder faded, slow and deliberate, receding back into the distance. I stayed on the deck for nearly an hour, unable to move, afraid that raising my head would call it back. When the first gray streaks of dawn broke the water, I finally dragged myself inside, trembling like a man twice my age. The foreman didn't ask questions this time. He just looked at me, his expression grim, and slid the card back into his pocket. His silence told me more than words ever could. I hadn't followed the rule perfectly, and now something out there knew me. As I lay in my bunk, eyes wide, sleep impossible, I realized the truth. The horizon isn't empty. It never was. It's alive, vast and waiting, and it doesn't want to be ignored. The rule wasn't just protection, it was blindness, a mercy to keep us from noticing what notices back. And now, because of a single mistake, I wasn't sure if I'd ever make it through another night unseen. The night after I glimpsed the horizon, I wanted nothing more than to stay in my bunk. But the rules don't care about fear. The foreman pressed the card into my hand again, and his finger lingered on the next line. Rule 5. Never let the elevator reach the bottom deck. After 3 a.m., his eyes darted toward the steel shaft at the center of the rig, where the grated doors waited with silent patience. If it tries to go down on its own, he muttered, stop it. Don't ask why. The elevator was a cage of rattling metal, narrow enough to make me feel trapped every time I rode it. Most nights, I avoided it by climbing the stairs, preferring sore legs over the unease of being enclosed. But tonight the shaft seemed to breathe, carrying a faint vibration that didn't match the rhythm of the generators. I stood near it longer than I wanted, flashlight beams sliding across the buttons, the floor indicator glowing faintly above the doors. It was only 10 minutes past midnight, and still the sight of it made my stomach knot. I told myself the bottom deck was nothing unusual. Storage rooms, spare equipment, and the water filtration system that kept the rig running. I'd been down there before, and though it was always damp and eerily quiet, there was nothing dangerous about it. But the way the foreman had said those words told me this was different. Something happened down there, something no one wanted to talk about. I checked my watch, half expecting the hands to jump forward, but time crawled, each minute dragging as if mocking me. The first hour passed in silence, my patrols around the upper deck uneventful. The floodlights glowed steady, the horizon remained hidden behind a veil of cloud, and the air smelled of salt and iron. I almost believed the night would pass quietly. Then I heard it, a soft metallic rattle from the center shaft, as though the elevator's cables were shifting without weight. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, ears straining. The noise faded, leaving only the steady thrum of machinery, but my pulse wouldn't slow. I forced myself closer, boots clanging against the catwalk, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the shaft, the elevator's doors were shut, but the floor indicator above them flickered faintly. It glowed red, marking 3, before shifting to 2. My skin prickled. No one else should have been riding at this hour. I pressed the radio to my lips, ready to call the foreman, but a gut-deep instinct stopped me. If someone was in that cage, I didn't want to hear their voice. I didn't want to know who or what was inside. The indicator blinked to 1. My hand shot out, slamming the emergency stop button on the wall. The shaft groaned, metal grinding deep below, and the indicator froze between 1 and 0. My chest heaved, sweat dripping down my neck despite the chill. Whatever was trying to descend hadn't reached the bottom yet. I kept my palm pressed against the button, heart hammering, convinced if I let go, the cage would drop into whatever waited beneath. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. My arm ached, my fingers numb, but I refused to release the pressure. Then faintly, from inside the shaft, I heard movement. Not the hum of machinery, but the scrape of something against metal. Slow, deliberate, climbing. My breath shuddered, and I staggered back, eyes glued to the doors. The sound rose higher, echoing in the shaft, until it felt like whatever was climbing was only feet away. I held my flashlight steady, the beam quivering with my shaking hand, waiting for the doors to rattle. They never did. The scraping stopped, replaced by silence so absolute it made my ears ache. I didn't dare move. Seconds bled into minutes, and still nothing came. Then, just as my body threatened to betray me with exhaustion, the indicator above the doors flickered again. The light sputtered, jumped back to 2, then 3, then went dark. The elevator hadn't gone down. It had gone up. I spun, flashlight cutting across the steel platform, but the deck was empty. The stairwell stood quiet, the catwalks deserted. Yet I felt it, an invisible weight pressing against me, the unmistakable sense that I wasn't alone. My throat dried, and I forced a whisper past my lips. "Who's there?" The only answer was the groan of steel settling, though I could have sworn the air moved differently, thicker, like someone unseen was breathing beside me. By the time my shift ended, I hadn't let go of that emergency button once. My arm trembled so badly, I had to pry my hand away, fingers stiff from holding. I stumbled back toward the barracks, every step echoing like I was walking inside a vast empty chamber. The foreman met me at the door, eyes flicking to my trembling hands. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He only muttered, "You kept it from reaching the bottom. Good. Never let it." When I collapsed onto my bunk, exhaustion crushed me instantly, but my dreams didn't bring rest. I dreamed of the elevator's doors opening, of black water flooding upward, of pale hands gripping the cage bars from inside. I woke with my throat raw from silent screams, drenched in sweat. My watch read 2:59 a.m. I lay frozen, paralyzed by dread, waiting. Outside my door, down the hall, I swore I heard the faint whine of cables shifting. The elevator was moving again. I hardly slept after the elevator incident. My ears tuned to every creak of steel and faint vibration that shook the rig. By the time my next shift rolled around, my nerves were frayed raw. The foreman pressed the rule card into my palm again. But this time he didn't bother with words. He just looked at me, his face pale in the harsh light, and tapped the next line. Rule 6. Never acknowledge the man in the yellow raincoat. I laughed bitterly at first, but he didn't so much as blink. His silence was worse than any warning. The storm that night came fast and brutal, waves hammering the platform so hard, the deck shuddered under my boots. Rain slashed sideways, making every shadow ripple, and the floodlights struggled to cut through the downpour. I pulled my hood tight, patrolling the slick steel walkways with my flashlight trembling in my hand. For a while, all I could hear was wind and water, until the sound shifted. The splash of footsteps joined mine, steady, measured, too deliberate to be the storm. I froze, my stomach dropping. Slowly, I turned my head, and there he was. A figure in a bright yellow raincoat, hood up, standing at the far edge of the deck near the railing. The coat gleamed under the floodlights, a perfect beacon in the storm. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't shout over the roar of wind. He just stood, watching me from beneath that shadowed hood. My throat closed, and every instinct screamed to demand who he was, to call out, but the rule burned in my mind like a brand. So I kept walking. My boots rang against steel, my breath ragged, every step forced. The figure didn't follow, but he didn't vanish either. Every time I glanced toward the far edge, he was still there, unmoving, as if the storm itself bent around him. I clenched my fists to stop them shaking, whispering to myself that this was just another test. I couldn't break the rule, not this one, not after what I'd seen when I slipped with the horizon. The raincoat man didn't leave me alone. Each lap around the rig, I found him somewhere new, at the base of the crane, beside the elevator doors, near the helipad, always at the edge of the floodlights, never closer, but always staring. I never saw him move, but he was there, as though the rig itself carried him along just out of reach. My mind raced. Was he the one who tried to ride the elevator down? Was he what the rules were keeping out, or worse, keeping in? At one point, the storm surged so hard that I lost my footing and slammed against the railing. My flashlight spun from my hand, clattering against the deck, its beam slicing wild arcs across the steel. When I snatched it back, the light swept across the raincoat man's face. For the first time, I saw under the hood, pale skin stretched tight, no mouth, no nose, just two hollow sockets where eyes should have been, dark as the sea. My chest locked up, and I staggered backward, nearly vomiting as the sight burned into me. I forced myself to keep moving, never speaking, never reaching toward him. But the longer the shift dragged, the harder it became. My thoughts twisted, my mind filling with an urge that wasn't mine. It whispered that if I just asked his name, if I just acknowledged him once, he'd stop following me, that he was lonely, that he needed me to speak. My lips trembled, the words pressing against my teeth like they were being pulled from me. I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth, forcing silence. By 3 a.m, the storm had calmed, but the raincoat man didn't vanish. He stood at the center deck, directly across from me, closer than he had ever been before. The floodlights hummed above us, their glow flickering with strain. My radio crackled suddenly, the foreman's voice cutting through with static. "Don't answer him," he hissed, urgent, as if he knew exactly where I was standing. Keep moving, and he'll lose interest." His voice was clipped off by silence, but it was enough to jolt me back into motion. I circled the deck again, every muscle in my body screaming from exhaustion, until finally the siren blared, the end of my shift. Relief almost buckled my knees, but I didn't dare show it. I walked calmly to the barracks door, back stiff, steps measured. When I glanced one final time over my shoulder, the raincoat man stood at the farthest edge, one hand raised in a slow wave, not friendly, not mocking, just patient, waiting. That night, I dreamed of him. I dreamed I woke in my bunk, and he was standing in the corner of the room, water dripping steadily from his coat onto the floor. In the dream, I broke the rule. I whispered, "What do you want?" His head turned toward me, and the hollow sockets filled with light so bright it burned my skin. I jolted awake, screaming, my throat raw, only to find my sheets soaked through, as if I'd been standing in the rain. The foreman never mentioned the rule again, but the way he avoided my eyes told me everything I needed to know. The man in the yellow raincoat hadn't left with the storm. He'd seen me, marked me, and now he was waiting for the night I'd finally slip, the night I'd finally speak. and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my silence. When dawn broke after the night of the raincoat man, I thought I'd get a reprieve. The storm had passed, the sea lay unnervingly calm, and the crew moved about their routines as if nothing had happened. But when I reported for duty, the foreman shoved the card into my hands again, his finger resting on the next line longer than usual. Rule 7. Never eat the fish that wash up on deck. He didn't bother explaining. He just muttered, "Not all of them come from here." His voice cracked on the last word, and that chilled me more than the cold spray ever could. The first hours of my shift were uneventful. The deck was still slick with rain, cables heavy with water, but the sky was clear. I walked my rounds, forcing myself not to look toward the horizon, not to check the elevator, not to glance at the corners where I sometimes imagined yellow fabric. For a while it almost felt normal. Then as I rounded the catwalk near the crane, I spotted it, a silver shape sprawled across the steel grating, scales glinting in the floodlight. A fish. At first I thought it was nothing unusual. Storms often hurled sea life onto the rig, and we usually tossed them back or fed them to the gulls. But as I drew closer, unease crawled up my spine. The fish wasn't thrashing, wasn't gasping, wasn't even twitching. It lay perfectly still, mouth open in a frozen scream, eyes clouded, and too large for its head. Its gills moved faintly, not in rhythm with breath, but in something closer to a pulse. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat, the rule echoing in my head like a drum. I grabbed a shovel from the supply rack and tried nudging it toward the edge. The instant the metal touched its body, a ripple ran through the fish, like water disturbed in a basin. Its eyes rolled back, and for a second I thought I saw something behind them, something that wasn't flesh or bone. I forced it over the railing with a violent shove, and the splash below echoed too loudly, too long, as if something far larger had entered the water. My hands shook, and I nearly dropped the shovel, but the sea wasn't finished. Within an hour, more appeared. Small ones, large ones, all scattered across the deck in places no wave could have reached. They weren't torn or broken from the storm. They looked placed, arranged like offerings, their glassy eyes turned upward toward the floodlights. Some twitched faintly, their bodies jerking in patterns that seemed more deliberate than random. My chest tightened, my throat closing, and I remembered the foreman's words, "Not all of them come from here." I worked feverishly, shoving them over the edge, my shovel clanging against steel as I fought to clear the deck. But the more I threw back, the more seemed to appear, as if the sea were vomiting them onto the rig in endless waves. And then came the smell. Not the sharp salt of fish, not the rot of death, but something sweet cloying, like fruit left too long in the sun. It coated my tongue, seeped into my lungs, and made my head swim. My stomach growled despite my revulsion, the scent gnawing at me in a way that felt wrong. That was when I understood the danger. The rule wasn't just about safety, it was about hunger. Whatever these things were, they wanted to be eaten. They wanted inside. I staggered back, covering my nose with my sleeve, but the scent clung stubbornly. My mouth watered against my will, saliva pooling, and I clenched my jaw until my teeth ached. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that just one bite would ease the gnawing. That one taste would silence the dizziness spinning through me. The temptation grew unbearable. I dropped the shovel and crouched beside one of the larger fish, its scales gleaming unnaturally, like liquid metal under the floodlight. My fingers hovered inches from its body, trembling with the urge to pick it up. I could see the flesh pulsing faintly, as if it were breathing in rhythm with me. The scent wrapped tighter, twisting my thoughts, and I felt my lips part. "Just one bite," the whisper urged. Just one. I might have broken then if not for the radio crackling at my side. The foreman's voice burst through, harsh and urgent. "Don't eat them," he barked, as though he knew exactly what was happening. "Clear them, keep moving, don't let them stay on deck." His voice snapped the spell, and I jerked backward, heart hammering, bile surging up my throat. I shoved the fish over the railing with trembling hands, forcing myself to ignore the way its body writhed as it disappeared into the sea. The rest of the shift was a blur of sweat and nausea. I kept shoving fish overboard, but the smell lingered, clinging to the steel, to my clothes, to my very skin. By the time the siren ended my watch, I was barely standing, my legs weak beneath me. I staggered to the barracks, half delirious, convinced I'd see scales growing from my arms. The foreman met me at the door, his face pale, and without a word, he handed me a vial of ammonia. "Breathe this when the smell gets too strong," he said. "It's the only thing that cuts through." That night, I couldn't eat. My stomach rejected every bite of normal food, and water tasted foul on my tongue. I lay awake, shivering, my body craving something I couldn't give it. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of fish again. Only this time, I wasn't throwing them back. I was sitting cross-legged on the deck, tearing into them with my bare hands, my mouth filled with the sweet, rotten flesh, their eyes rolling back as they twitched in pleasure at being devoured. I woke with blood in my mouth, the taste metallic and sharp. My sheets were damp with sweat, my jaw aching as though I'd been chewing all night. My stomach growled so loud it echoed in the tiny room. When I stumbled to the sink and spat, red water swirled down the drain. I gripped the edges of the basin, staring at my reflection, terrified that one night I wouldn't be able to resist. That sooner or later, one of those things would end up inside me. The morning after the fish, I could barely lift my head from the pillow, my body weak from resisting whatever sickness had tried to take me. The foreman said nothing when I stumbled into the mess hall. He just shoved the rule card into my hand again. My stomach turned when I read the next line. Rule 8, never follow a lantern that appears on the water. I asked him what it meant, my voice hoarse, but he only muttered, "If you see one, you'll know, and you'll want to go after it. That's the danger." By the time night fell, I felt steadier, though the hunger lingered like a parasite gnawing at me from the inside. I walked the deck slowly, the sea unnervingly calm. No fish, no raincoat man, no movement except the gentle slap of waves against steel. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself the night would be easy. But then, just past 2 a.m., I saw it, a faint glow hovering across the black water, bobbing with the rise and fall of the sea. A lantern. It looked impossibly far and close all at once. Its light golden and warm, so different from the harsh white of our floodlights. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought of home. Quiet docks, nights spent fishing with my father, the soft glow of lanterns guiding us back to shore. The memory wrapped around me, pulling me toward the railing. My hands gripped the steel, my boots edging closer without permission. The warmth promised safety, comfort, even belonging. It whispered that if I just followed it, I'd never feel hunger again. I forced myself to step back, shaking my head violently, whispering the rule under my breath. But the lantern pulsed brighter, almost beckoning, and this time I heard something else. A voice, faint, feminine, drifting across the waves like smoke. She called my name. My knees nearly buckled. The sound so tender, so familiar, that tears stung my eyes. My mother had been gone for years, and yet the voice sounded exactly like hers. "Come home," it said. "Come back." My throat ached with the urge to answer. The longer I stared, the more the rig seemed to fade. The floodlights dimmed in my peripheral vision. The steel under my boots felt insubstantial, and the only real thing was the glow across the water. My body leaned forward, one leg swinging over the railing, before I even realized it. Salt spray hit my face, cool and sharp, snapping me back for a breath. I yanked my leg down, chest heaving, gripping the railing hard enough for the metal to bite into my palms. The voice grew sharper now, insistent, almost angry. It called again, louder, the sweetness gone, replaced with demand. The lantern bobbed closer, though no boat carried it, just that lone flame, riding the waves toward me like a predator disguised as hope. My heart raced, and I staggered back, whispering no over and over, shaking my head, clinging to the memory of the rule: don't follow, don't acknowledge, don't give it what it wants. I grabbed my radio, thumb shaking over the button, but before I could call for help, the signal hissed alive on its own. Static roared, and then the same voice poured through the speaker, louder, closer, as if she were right beside me. "I'm waiting," it whispered. "Don't leave me out here in the dark." I dropped the radio like it had burned me, backing away until my shoulders hit the bulkhead. My breathing came fast, ragged, my eyes locked on that cursed light. Then the lantern did something worse. It sank, slowly, deliberately, slipping beneath the waves. I expected it to vanish, but instead its glow spread, bleeding through the black water like veins of fire. The sea beneath me lit up with shapes, shadows too big to be fish, too strange to be whales. They swirled beneath the rig, circling, their forms flickering in and out of view with every pulse of the lantern's glow. The steel deck vibrated faintly, as if they were brushing against the pylons that anchored us. I forced myself to retreat, stumbling back toward the center of the platform, away from the railing, away from the sea. My ears rang with phantom whispers, promises of safety, threats of abandonment, all tangled together. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the voice seeped through anyway, curling in my skull like smoke filling a chamber. The hunger inside me roared, demanding I obey, demanding I go where the light led. For one terrifying second, I almost broke. The floodlights saved me. They flickered once, buzzing angrily, then surged brighter, as though fighting back against the encroaching glow. The golden lantern light faltered, shrinking, dimming, before sputtering out entirely. The shapes beneath the water dissolved into darkness, leaving only the steady slap of waves. The voice cut off mid-word, replaced by silence, so sharp it made my teeth ache. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, drenched in sweat. When the siren finally marked the end of my shift, I staggered back inside, my legs trembling, vision swimming. The foreman was waiting in the corridor, his face grim. He didn't ask if I'd seen the lantern. He just studied me, nodded once, and muttered, "It won't be the last time. Next time, don't look so long." His words were meant to warn, but they sounded more like a sentence. That night, when I finally slept, I dreamed I was floating in the sea. No rig, no floodlights, just me and the endless black water. The lantern hovered inches from my face, its glow warm and golden, and inside it I saw her, my mother, smiling, reaching for me. My arms moved toward her, and as my fingers brushed the flame, I felt something cold and slick wrap around my legs, pulling me down. I woke screaming, thrashing against my sheets, the scent of salt water thick in my lungs. The dream of the lantern still clung to me when I stumbled into the control room the next evening. My eyes ringed with exhaustion and the taste of seawater still bitter in my mouth. The foreman shoved another card into my hand, his expression as unreadable as ever, and I felt my stomach turn when I read the line. Rule 9. If you hear knocking from beneath the floor, never answer it. I tried to joke that we were on steel, not wood, but his silence made the words feel heavier. "It doesn't matter what it sounds like," he said. "It matters that it isn't us." The rig was alive with mechanical hums, the constant grind of machinery working against the pressure of the sea. At first I told myself the knocking would be obvious, something unnatural I could easily avoid. But as the night stretched on, every sound began to blur together. The clang of chains swaying in the wind, the groan of pipes, the hiss of steam. My ears strained for something that didn't belong, and in the silence between shifts, I heard it. 3 sharp raps, steady, deliberate, rising from the steel beneath my boots. My blood ran cold. The sound was subtle, but unmistakable, too precise to be random, too rhythmic to be machinery. I froze, staring at the grated floor of the corridor, the echo vibrating faintly up through my soles. My first instinct was to crouch down, to press my ear against the metal and listen closer. Curiosity nearly dragged me down, whispering that maybe it was just a trapped animal or some trick of pressure. But the rule burned in my mind like a brand. Don't answer, don't acknowledge, don't engage. Still, the knocking continued. Slow, patient, unhurried, like whoever or whatever was beneath knew I was listening. I forced myself to walk away, each step heavier than the last, the echo of the knocks following me down the corridor. But then they shifted. Instead of beneath me, they echoed ahead, as if moving through the rig's belly, pacing me from below. My breath quickened, and I nearly broke into a run, but every time I turned a corner, the knocking adjusted, always beneath, always following. By the time I reached the mess hall, my nerves were frayed to threads. The other crew sat eating in silence, their faces gray, eyes sunken, but none of them flinched at the faint echoes. Either they couldn't hear it, or worse, they had learned to ignore it. I forced myself to sit, my tray untouched, my ears tuned to every faint vibration. For a moment the knocks stopped, relief bloomed in my chest, fragile and fleeting. Then, with sickening precision, the sound returned directly beneath my chair. 3 raps, paused, 3 more. I bolted upright, the bench screeching against the floor, my tray clattering to the ground. The others looked up, their expressions flat, hollow, but no one asked why I'd reacted. No one acknowledged the sound at all. It was as if the knocking only existed for me. My chest tightened as I stumbled back, pressing against the wall, whispering to myself, not to answer, not to give it what it wanted. But part of me wanted to stomp my boot against the floor, to test, to see if it would respond. That temptation nearly broke me when I returned to my quarters. The knocking was waiting, soft but steady, echoing beneath the thin floor by my bed. It grew louder when I lay down, vibrating up through the mattress, syncing with my heartbeat. I shoved my hands over my ears, rocking myself like a child, but even then the rhythm seeped through my bones. My name rose in my mind unbidden, as if the knocks were spelling it out, letter by letter, over and over. Sleep was impossible. At some point desperation won out, and I crawled beneath the bed, pressing my palm against the cold steel. The instant I touched it, the knocks stopped. The silence was so sudden, so absolute, that relief nearly broke me into laughter. But before the soundless moment could settle, something pressed back, not from the other side of the floor, but against my hand, from inside the metal itself, a cold, wet palm, slick and unyielding, pressing into mine. I screamed and tore my hand away, scrambling out, slamming myself against the wall. My breath came in ragged sobs, sweat pouring down my face. The knocking resumed, louder this time, angrier, the rhythm faster, like fists pounding to be let in. I begged aloud for it to stop, my voice breaking, but the sound only grew more violent. The walls seemed to hum with it, the entire rig shaking with unseen fists. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ceased. The silence pressed against my eardrums, thick and unnatural. I sat frozen, chest heaving, ears straining for any sign of return. Minutes dragged by, stretching into hours. When the morning siren blared, I stumbled out, hollow-eyed, clutching my bandaged hand, where blisters had already begun to rise from that brief, impossible touch. The foreman caught me in the corridor. His gaze flicked to my hand, then back to my face, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't before, not just weariness, but pity. "You touched it, didn't you?" he asked softly. I couldn't answer, my throat too dry, my voice gone. He shook his head, sighing, and muttered, "It knows you now. Next time, it won't knock." His words lodged in me like shards of ice, and for the first time, I wondered if I'd already doomed myself. The foreman's words haunted me through the next day, sinking deeper than the blisters on my palm. "It knows you now." I couldn't shake the feeling that the floor itself was watching me, waiting for me to slip, to answer again. When my next shift came, I forced myself into routine, checking lights, walking the perimeter, ignoring the whispers of the sea. But dread tightened around me when I read the card in my hand. Rule 10. Never enter the engine room. After midnight, my throat closed. The engine room was the heart of the rig, and we all knew it never truly slept. The first hours passed uneventfully, though I kept catching myself glancing at the stairwell that led down to the machinery levels. Even from above, I could feel its pulse, a deep thrum, like the heartbeat of some enormous beast chained beneath us. By 11, the air seemed heavier, humming with static, every bolt and pipe vibrating faintly beneath my boots. I stayed on the upper deck as long as possible, pacing beneath the floodlights, telling myself I had no reason to go down. But at 12:01, the radio on my belt crackled. It wasn't the foreman's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice I recognized. It was low, muffled, like words spoken from behind a wall of water. The message came in broken bursts, fragments of sentences, but one thing was clear: engine room, hurry, critical. My blood iced over. I froze, knowing it had to be a trick, and yet my training screamed at me. If something failed down there, the entire rig could be in danger. My boots carried me halfway to the stairwell before I stopped, gripping the railing hard enough to make my knuckles ache. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, a command instead of a plea. Now, just that one word, hissed like steam escaping a broken valve. I backed away, whispering to myself, never after midnight, never after midnight. But then came another sound, one that shattered my resolve, a scream, human, raw and terrified, bursting from the radio so violently, I nearly dropped it. "Help me," the voice wailed. "It's burning. I can't." The transmission cut to static, leaving me shaking, torn between instinct and survival. Against everything in me, I found myself on the stairs. The deeper I descended, the more wrong the air felt. Thick, metallic, tinged with oil and something fouler, like meat left too long in the sun. The thrum of the machinery grew louder, each step vibrating up my legs. I told myself I wouldn't go all the way in, just far enough to prove the room was stable, that the scream had been a trick. But when I reached the heavy steel door, it was already ajar, groaning faintly on its hinges. The heat that rolled out hit me like a wave, searing my skin even through my uniform. Inside, the engine room glowed with an unnatural light, reddish, pulsing, as though the machines were no longer powered by fuel but by something alive. The pistons shuddered in rhythm, valves exhaling bursts of steam that hissed like whispers, and in the spaces between, I heard it, the faint echo of knocking, not from beneath, but within the walls of the machines themselves. I nearly fled right then, but a figure moved in the corner of the room, half shrouded in shadow. It was one of the crew, or at least it wore the shape of one. His coveralls were stained, his face hidden in the flickering glow, but his posture was unmistakable. He turned slowly, his movements jerky, unnatural, and when his eyes met mine, they gleamed with the same sickly red light as the engines. His mouth opened, and steam poured out, carrying words that scraped across my skull. "You shouldn't be here." I staggered back, my shoulder hitting the doorframe, but my body refused to obey. The man or thing took a step closer, his boots clanging against the steel with hollow resonance. "It knows you," he whispered, echoing the foreman's words. "And now I know you too." His head tilted unnaturally far to the side, bones creaking, and for one horrifying moment, I saw something moving beneath his skin, pressing outward, shifting, as though his flesh was only a thin barrier between me and something vast. I bolted, shoving the door wide and sprinting back up the stairs, the heat chasing me like a furnace blast. Behind me, I heard the engines groan louder, faster, as if straining toward some unbearable climax. The radio at my belt crackled again, but this time, it was my own voice echoing through it, screaming in perfect mimicry. My lungs seized with terror as I stumbled onto the deck, collapsing against the bulkhead, ears ringing with phantom screams. When I dared look back, the stairwell was pitch black, the heat gone, the hum of the engines back to their normal steady rhythm. It was as though nothing had changed, as though the nightmare had been mine alone. But the smell lingered, the stink of burnt oil and rotting flesh, and in the silence that followed, I swore I could still hear faint, patient knocking from far below. I barely made it through the rest of the shift, every second dragging like hours, my body trembling, my mind fraying. When the morning siren sounded, I was already at the foreman's door, pounding until he opened. His eyes scanned my face, then drifted to the smear of blackened grease on my collar, and he sighed, closing his eyes as if in pain. "You went down there," he said flatly. I nodded, unable to speak. "Then it's too late to keep you out. Rule 11 is the only one that matters now." The foreman's words burned into me, heavier than all the others, and I knew this last line wasn't just another guideline. Rule 11. When the lights go out, don't move until they return. He didn't explain further, didn't warn or threaten, just shut the door in my face, leaving me to carry the weight of it alone. I stood in the corridor, the hum of the rig in my ears, and realized this rule wasn't about superstition. It was about inevitability. The lights would fail. It was only a matter of time. All through the day, I caught myself staring at the flood lamps strung along the deck, at the harsh bulbs in the mess hall ceiling, at the weak glow of my quarters lamp. Every flicker made my chest tighten, every shadow feel longer than it should. By evening, I was pacing like a prisoner, unable to eat, my hands trembling whenever my thoughts drifted back to the engine room. The knocking hadn't returned, but I felt it in my bones, waiting, always waiting. When my shift began, the foreman didn't even look at me, just muttered, "Stay still," as if the words might save me when the time came. The first half of the night stretched endlessly, the floodlights glaring down on the slick deck as the sea rolled below. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but I forced them open, terrified of closing them, terrified of losing track of time. At 2 a.m., the air shifted. The wind died. The rig's hum seemed to pause. A breath held too long, and then it happened. One by one, the lights winked out, swallowed by the dark, until I stood blind on the deck, with nothing but the black ocean stretching in every direction. My first instinct was to move. Panic clawed at me, urging me to stumble, to grope for the railing, to do anything but stand in that suffocating dark. But the rule hammered in my skull: don't move, don't breathe, don't give them reason. My chest burned as I froze in place, every muscle screaming. The silence pressed in heavy, thicker than the sea itself, broken only by the faint creak of the rig's steel bones shifting in the night. I closed my eyes, but it made no difference. Darkness was total. That was when I heard them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling me on the deck. They weren't boots like mine, but softer, wet, slapping against the steel, as though the sea itself had climbed aboard. My pulse thundered, sweat rolling down my back, but I didn't move, didn't even twitch. The steps grew closer, then stopped just behind me. The air smelled of brine and rot, like fish left to rot on hot docks. Breath stirred the hairs on the back of my neck, cold and damp, as if something stood inches away, waiting for me to flinch. Voices followed, low at first, then rising, whispering in unison. They didn't speak in any language I knew, but the sound wormed into me, crawling behind my ears, sliding beneath my skin. I wanted to clap my hands over my ears, to scream, but the rule echoed louder: don't move, don't acknowledge, don't break. My muscles locked until they ached. My lungs begged for air, but still I held. The whispers grew agitated, circling, their tones climbing higher, until the deck beneath me vibrated with their anger. Something brushed against my arm, cold and slick like seaweed, and my body almost betrayed me then. My knees buckled, but I clenched my teeth so hard I tasted blood, forcing myself upright. unmoving. The touch lingered, sliding across my chest, tracing my jawline, searching for weakness. When it found none, the whispers cut off at once, and silence returned so sharp it left my ears ringing. My heart hammered, and I realized I had tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the deck. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, hours. Time meant nothing in that suffocating dark. Then as suddenly as they had gone out, the lights flared back to life. Flood lamps blazed, ceiling bulbs buzzed, and the deck returned to harsh brightness. But the space around me was empty, untouched, as if nothing had happened. My hands shook uncontrollably, my legs gave out, and I crumpled to the deck, gasping like a drowning man finally breaking the surface. When my shift ended, I stumbled back to the foreman's office, desperate for answers. But the door was open this time, and the chair behind his desk was empty. A half-burned lantern sat on the table, its glass cracked, its wick still faintly warm. My breath caught, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Not on the deck, not in the mess hall, not even in my own skin. The rules hadn't saved me, they had only delayed whatever waited in the dark. And now, as I sit here, writing these words, the lights around me are starting to flicker again. The hum of the rig falters, stretching thin, my throat closes, my body locks, and I know the dark is coming for me once more. The only thing I can do is wait, still as stone, and hope the light returns before I'm claimed. Because if it doesn't, if you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.